Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Apple, Provost of the University of Delaware, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you tonight. This has been an incredible year. Last year at this time, the country was engaged in one of the most exciting presidential elections in memory. And the University of Delaware was totally involved in the process for several reasons. We were not shy about taking advantage of the Bloomberg News article calling us the epicenter of the 2008 presidential race, a reference to three men who were front and center during the campaign and had been students in our own Department of Political Science and International Relations. They are, of course, then Vice Presidential nominee and subsequent Vice President Joe Biden, Republican strategist Steve Schmidt, and our guest this evening, David Plouffe, a key leader in the successful campaign of now President Barack Obama. Last fall, the Department of Communication and the Department of Political Science and International Relations sponsored a popular course and a lecture series on the fall election and featured Election Central, a multimedia event on election night. These programs were the brainchild of Betsy Peirce, Chairperson of Communications, and Gretchen Bauer, Chairperson of Political Science and International Relations, and I applaud them for their vision and their great work in producing these events. This fall's course and series reflects on President Obama's first year in office. 9 months into his term, Obama has profoundly affected our country and our culture, and our UD faculty and national experts are providing incisive analysis of the various issues and actions of this administration. 2 weeks ago, many of you were privileged to hear from President Obama's senior advisor, David Axelrod. And on December 2nd, we'll have a Republican viewpoint from Ed Gillespie, former chairman of the Republican National Committee and advisor to President George W. Bush. These series and other events are the first steps towards the establishment of the University of Delaware's Center for Political Communication. This interdisciplinary institute will focus on the study of politics and foreign policy and will support research, undergraduate and graduate programs, and major public events surrounding foreign policy and international relations, political communication, and responsible citizenship. In pursuing this objective, we will draw the expertise of our own faculty and alumni, as well as distinguished visiting scholars and practitioners. Exactly 6 months ago, we were fortunate to host the two presidential campaign leaders in a fascinating and stimulating discussion about the election, 90 days into the new presidency. Tonight, we are delighted to be hosting the return to campus of Democratic campaign manager David Plouffe, who is on the eve of a book tour for a soon-to-be-released book about the 2008 campaign. David was on campus today to meet with Professor Phil Jones' course, The American Political System, and generously agreed to spend this evening in conversation with Professor Ralph Begleiter and our two student journalists and the audience. David Plouffe's political career began as a student volunteering in a local campaign. Students in the audience, take note. He went on to work on several national campaigns and then served as executive director of the Democratic National Campaign Committee. Subsequently, he joined Axelrod Associates, now called AKP&D, Message and Media, and he became a named partner of the firm in 2004. The rest, as they say, is history. At the University of Delaware, we strive for excellence in everything we do, and in the field of politics and political communication, we can boast that we produce the best. It is therefore with great pleasure that I welcome David Plouffe back to the University of Delaware for the latest in what we anticipate will be many visits over the next years. It's great to have you with us this evening. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. We appreciate it, and welcome to all of you back to the epicenter of politics at the University of Delaware. We're going to get right to our conversation with David. We've previously agreed he doesn't want to make any opening remarks, so we can have lots of questions and opportunity for you as well to engage in the conversation. Joining me tonight for our conversation are two University of Delaware seniors, Ms. Antonia Borelli and Ms. Ashley Byro, both of whom are journalism students. Antonia is a broadcast journalist, and Ashley is one of the editors of The Review, the student newspaper here at UD. Thanks, both of you, for participating in this program. Just want to say the reason I got my computer here is I'm not texting with friends or getting bored or whatever, or leaking any information to the media. We are live casting this on Second Life. Some of you may know what that is. What it means is that participants from outside the university, and in fact all around the world, will be able to both listen and perhaps even ask questions as well if they want to later in the conversation. I'll take the liberty, if I may, of throwing out the first question. And David, I guess you just heard Tom Apple say that you and your McCain campaign counterpart, Steve Schmidt, are teaming up together with the university's University Center for Political Communication. And I know we'll hear more about that in coming weeks, but there might be students in this audience tonight here who are thinking that political communication, well, that's just limited to politics, and maybe I'm not all that interested in politics. I have another career in mind. Is that really true, that political communication is really just limited to people who are interested in conducting campaigns?
Well, first, Ralph, thanks for having me here today. It's great to be with all of you. Thank Provost for your kind remarks. I'd like to start off by saying once 8:07 hits, feel free, if the Phillies score, to shout out that. If the Dodgers score, just keep it to yourself till we can watch the game.
Who are they?
Yeah. You won't be shouting much longer. No, I think that what we're seeing is, in the 2008 campaign, but both in the primaries and what the McCain campaign and the Obama campaign, is you see a fascination out there in the private sector, in academic sectors, to understand how communication is changing. I mean, you guys are fortunate to be seeing that with your own eyes. I mean, it was a long time that communication was fairly stagnant in this country. We had 3 television networks, and eventually we had cable news, you had TV, you had newspapers, and that's how people got information. Obviously, that's changing dramatically. People are getting information most often now online. They're sharing a lot of information, whether it's emailing YouTubes that they find interesting or informative. They're texting each other. And I think the study of political communication, how you reach people, voters or consumers, the different disciplines, the messages that are working out there, how to make sure that you're not just delivering a message to people, but you're involving them in the message so that they feel part of it and are able to become message ambassadors out there. So Steve and I are excited about the opportunity to work on this with you and the university, because we think that we can produce the next generation of communication leaders. In the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, people are helping businesses succeed, and I think that'll be great for the university, and we need all of you who have such talent to offer to be involved in your country and helping shape the future. Some of you may see it my way, some of you may see it Steve's way, but we need your talent, we need your involvement, and I think the Center for Political Communication here can be a really shining example of what this university can do and really produce some of the next generation communications talent in the country and in the world.
Okay, now it's your turn. Ashley?
Okay. During President Obama's campaign, my oldest sister signed up to receive email updates from his website. You've recently said you are no longer part of the Obama administration. Why then does she still receive emails that are signed by you?
Well, I am still very much part of the Obama family. I'm basically spending a couple of years not in the administration. I have a young family, and I was orphaning them for too long, for 2 years. So I'm spending some time reconnecting, but I'm still do all I can from the outside to help. We are very committed to remaining in contact with people. We built a 13 million person email list that still is in existence. It's essentially our own television network, and we still communicate with those people through videos from the president, through emails from people like me and Mitch Stewart. And it's a great way to stay in touch because, again, people get information in much different ways. You can't assume anymore that they're watching the TV news religiously, they're reading newspapers front cover to back. They're not. The ability to communicate directly with people, to their cell phone, to their computer, is a wonderful tool. And I think it's going to become increasingly important in the years to come.
Are you able to say things in those emails coming from David Plouffe outside the White House that the Obama administration wouldn't be able to say?
Not really. I mean, you know, when we're communicating about health care, about energy, you're obviously, the best thing to do is communicate what the president's communicating. And so I think that, no, we try to be in alignment there. I think that's important. And one of the things that I think made his campaign successful, one of the reasons I think his presidency will be successful, is his tone's a little bit different than most political figures. And we were criticized for that in the campaign. Well, you didn't always get in the gutter. You didn't hit low enough. But I think people wanted to have a serious election. Voters want to be treated like adults. And I think he does that, and he did that and does that. And so we try to have our communication be not as snarky as you often see political communication being.
Antonia, you still get those emails?
I do, actually, all the time. And I believe now they go to my spam, but I do still receive them.
You got to fix your spam filter.
I do. That I do have to do. Definitely.
Go ahead.
But Mr. Plouffe, as we all know here this evening, you were President Obama's campaign manager. You were with him from the beginning, and then you were with him when he was in fact elected our president. Has the presidency in fact changed Barack Obama?
No, I think it was one of his strengths in the campaign. I think it's one of his strengths as president, is he is just a very normal human being. And I think that, in a lot of organizations, whether it's a political campaign, maybe this is controversial, a university, a business, sometimes the leaders can have, behavioral issues. They'll get upset at small things. They'll obsess about small things. We didn't have that with Barack Obama. He was very even-keeled. And I think he's got a remarkable metabolism for the presidency, which is, when you're dealing with Afghanistan and healthcare and the economic crisis and pay packages on Wall Street, and you're dealing with Iran, the ability to sort of calmly go through that obstacle course, to ask the right questions, to probe, to get the best out of people. He is in many ways, I think, better suited for the presidency than the campaign, and he ended up being a pretty good presidential candidate. So no, not at all. I think he's got a very healthy outlook, and again, I think approach. And he's a very calm person, and that helped in the campaign, because when the leader of an organization is wigging out, everyone's going to wig out. But when the leader of an organization is calm during trying moments, that's going to instill calm throughout the organization. And I think the same thing is happening today in Washington. There's a calmness. Now, don't mistake that for a lack of urgency, but there's a calmness, which I think, that you make your best decisions when, even if you've got to make them quick, when you're grounded and there's a calmness. And listen, I've become a big believer in any organization. How that organization makes decisions is a big part of whether they're going to succeed or fail. And in the campaign, we learn to make decisions well and quickly and not kind of stew in them. Know you're going to make some bad decisions, but then move on.
Despite the calmness, some, including President Carter, suggest that some of the criticism Obama has received is based on his race. Do you think that's why his administration has seen so much opposition?
No, I would agree with exactly what the president said about that. I reject that, and I think it's not a helpful dialogue to have. I think he's got political opponents. I would argue that their opposition is more based on politics than principle. But nonetheless, I think they have a view of the country, and they've got a view of some of these issues. I don't think it has to do with race at all.
Is it a bad thing to base opposition on politics rather than principle? I mean, is
Well,
politics a bad
I think
thing?
if that's the core of your opposition, yes. I think that the American people, I think, really desire and value political opposition, but when it's grounded in principle. So, and this isn't my opinion. Right now, the vast majority of the country, pretty much every Democrat, pretty much every independent, and about a third to 40% of Republicans believe that the Washington Republicans, I don't try and paint the entire Republican Party with the same brush, because I think the Washington Republicans are their special brand of problem right now. You've got lots of Republican governors and mayors and business leaders and activists, I think, doing more responsible things. But when it's solely based on politics, and that's what most of the people in this country believe, that the opposition is not based on principle or another positive viewpoint, it's based on politics. That's not my opinion, that's the facts. I think that's dangerous. And again, I think that technology has changed political dialogue a lot. I think it's harder to kind of hide the ball. People are out there having conversations, they're doing their own research, and so I think that one of the reasons I think you're seeing more optimism and more movement for healthcare reform is I think people are kind of sorting out some of the arguments from the summer and deciding, people, not politicians, people are talking amongst themselves and deciding that things like death panels and people not being able to see their same doctors is just not true.
Ashley, I interrupted. Did you want to follow up on that, or? No. Okay, Antonia, that's all right.
Okay. So now President Obama's one-year mark is fast approaching. Would you say that he has brought us the change that he promised during his campaign?
Well, yeah, I'd say that he does not sort of subscribe to these artificial markers. 100 days, 1 year. You know, we got big problems out there. And so I think, first of all, our relationship with the rest of the world, which is very important, has been strengthened in fundamental ways. And that's going to help us solve shared problems and challenges like climate change, like healthcare, like the economy. I mean, the truth is, your generation, the students here, you guys understand, you know, how small the world is we live in. There's a very healthy worldview, and you understand that all these problems are interconnected. That has nothing to do with, by the way, what's going on Capitol Hill. That's his leadership and his approach. And I think we're going to look back years from now and understand this is a very important development. I think he's done some tough things to help stabilize the economy. I can assure you when we were running for president last year, we weren't sitting around saying, hey, you know what we'll do when we first take office? We'll have to spend a bunch of taxpayer money to bail out the banks and the auto companies. Okay, not part of the plan, okay? Not really politically popular, but tough thing that I think in pretty short-term history, but certainly long-term history, will be seen as a leadership moment. I think we're on the precipice of doing something we've talked about for a century, and finally having a healthcare system that's going to control costs and expand coverage and stop some of the insurance company practices that deny coverage. I think that we've seen real progress in the area of education. See, progress doesn't always have to be about legislation. I think that he and the First Lady, the education secretary, I think they're making huge inroads out there as they talk about the value and need of more parental involvement. You know, it's a big deal. And I know that these conversations are happening around kitchen tables. Parents are talking about this much more than they did before. And he's changed Washington in fundamental ways, made the government much more transparent, you know, limiting the access of lobbyists in the executive branch, things that he promised in the campaign. So, but change is hard. Listen, Washington is a place that in many ways is fundamentally broken. They've ignored tough problems for a long time. It's very much based on short-term politics. There's pettiness there. People there do not think long-term. The whole culture there, the media, the political community, they treat every day as if it's the most important day in the history of the Republic. We saw this during the campaign. If you watch the media and the sort of political commentary, it would be like every day was election day. And of course it wasn't. And I think what the president brings is a long-term view, which is don't worry about what they're saying, sorry, Ralph, on CNN tonight, or what your political opponent is saying, and then, you know, make a course correction based on that. Know where you're heading. Know where you're heading. It's going to take a long time to get there. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to make mistakes. But I think so. I think more than anything else, not everybody here is going to agree with this. I feel very passionately about this, and that's why I ran for president. It is not written in stone that the United States of America will remain as strong as we are today and have been in the past. All you have to be is a casual student of history to understand that strong countries, strong empires in the past have to renew themselves, okay? I think on the issues of healthcare and energy, we are in a whole separate world than the rest of the world on healthcare. It is destroying our economy in some fundamental ways. We have to get healthcare costs under control, or job creation, wage growth, the deficit are going to continue to be huge problems. And secondly, on energy. If we do not lead on energy, if we do not lead on energy in every way that's important, the jobs, the great jobs of the future, the technologies of the future, the exporting of those technologies, we're not going to have the leading market share, okay? And we are behind the 8 ball. And let me assure you, China and India aren't sleeping, okay? There's a narrative in Washington that says the president's trying to do too much. Maybe he can try and do health care. Maybe he shouldn't even be trying to do that with the economic crisis. But he should wait and do energy in like 2011. Really? We're going to put off doing the things we need to do to become the leader in energy jobs and energy technology for another 2 years? Do you think our competitors are doing this? This is a big stakes moment for the country. If we don't do the things we need to do now in those 2 areas and do the financial regulation reform to make sure what happened in the economic crisis doesn't happen again anytime soon, we're going to rue this for decades. And, you know, the debate in Washington often seems smaller than that. It's about, well, what's the polls say, or what does this mean for the next election? That's why we haven't made progress. And he's bound and determined, no matter, you know, the short-term evaluation of the moment, to make progress on these things. Because you guys, You know, you're not going to inherit this in 40 years. That's not the way the world works anymore. People who are 22, 24, 26, 30, 35 can lead the country. Our campaign was largely organized and built on the backs of kids about 3 or 4 years older than you are. Okay? This is your future. Okay? This is your future. And pretty soon you're going to be out there getting paychecks, seeing that too much of it is going to healthcare. You're not getting raises. That the great jobs of the future, we don't have the pathway that we should. We see China ahead of us in automotive and battery technology. We got to get with the program here, or we're not going to be as strong a country as we need to be or deserve to be.
Do you think he's had to spend time renewing himself and cleaning up issues from the past administration, and that's caused him to push some of his goals back?
No, I mean, you know, I think that obviously you had, I think, an economy that was in tatters. I think more than that, there was an economy that wasn't based on how do you help lift the middle class. You know, you had a viewpoint in Washington that was more geared towards the very wealthy and the special interest. He wakes up every day, as he thinks about healthcare, energy, the economy, he's got the middle class squarely in his sights. We obviously had repair work to do around the world in terms of our relationship, sure. But he doesn't really focus on that, okay? We got a set of challenges. Some of them may be based on decisions that were made in the last 8 years. But on energy, this goes back a quarter century. On healthcare, it goes back 100 years that we've ducked these tough challenges. So his view, as he said last week, I think very well, you know, he's had to pick up the mop a little bit, sure. And some of that's for the last 8 years, some of it's much longer than that. But you can't cry or quibble about it. You've got a job to do. And he did not run for president to occupy that office. He ran for president to try and make progress on these vexing problems that have bedeviled the country for too long.
You have a follow-up, Antonia?
Yes, I do, actually. You had mentioned earlier about Afghanistan as one of the issues. And I know that today the president met with John Kerry because he had urged him to wait in his decision on Afghanistan. What do you think, knowing the president, what do you think he will do?
Oh, I'm not going to wade into that. I'm not there. I'm not privy to those conversations, and I will observe it like the rest of you. I'm not going to tread on that. But nice try. You're learning quickly. You have a career in Washington.
Yeah, you've done that a couple times. Let me follow up on that. Washington's a broken place. Sometimes the debate in Washington is small. You have a place in Washington. Is President Obama running or, you know, behaving as president as if he were not actually in Washington? He's somehow outside that cocoon?
No, I think that there are probably some days as he wishes he weren't there. But I think that no, because there are some challenges and opportunities in his presidency that are more about leadership. You can do some things just, from an executive standpoint that don't have to deal with Congress. But on healthcare, on energy, on financial regulation reform, as they begin to tackle the deficit, a lot of that has to do with legislation. It is our system of government. But I think that, most of you, some of you in the audience have followed politics for decades. Some of you are students and you're just following it closely for the time. I mean, I think that it is a place that tends to, become very small and very petty and very much focused on the short term. And I think that has been a systemic problem for our government. But no, he has obviously got to make progress in Congress, and he's working very hard in that regard. He's got a remarkable cabinet. We do have great members of Congress in both parties. So, I think there are some exceptions to that, but with a broad brush, I think all you have to do is look at recent history and not so recent history to understand that, listen, I would put it, can a business, can a family, can a city, a government, a state government, they can't afford to kick these problems down the road like Washington has. In your own family, your own business, you just couldn't operate that way. I mean, you don't have the luxury of saying, we'll deal with that next year, we'll deal with that next decade. Or you'll go out of business, or your family will be destroyed. And so I think that's what's been missing in Washington. I think his leadership is going to really make a big difference in terms of convincing enough people in Congress that, we've got to take action on healthcare and energy, or we won't be as strong a country as we can and should be.
To set himself up for the long term, what is he doing for per se he doesn't get reelected? How is he setting things up in the government for his predecessor to make things okay in the future?
Well, no, I think that, first of all, he's not focused on on re-election at all, neither are I. I mean, I think it's the right approach. You've got big problems. If you're focused on solving them through the prism of an election, you know, you're not going to make the right choices all the time. You got to kind of put that aside. I mean, this really is a crisis moment in the country. It really is. And so, you know, the re-election has to take a backseat. So hopefully, from my perspective, others in the room will disagree. We'll make the kind of progress on energy, on healthcare, on financial regulation reform.
In the next 4 years.
Yeah, so that, you know, that we've made progress in that regard, and that can hopefully be some lasting progress. Now, obviously, legislation in and of itself doesn't mean anything if it doesn't get implemented properly. So, you know, when healthcare reform passes, as I think it will, you know, we can't just all celebrate if that's our point of view and everything's going to be great. It's going to take a long time and a lot of hard work to make sure the promise of it, realize the cost savings, that the insurance companies can't deny people coverage anymore, that we do see the kind of coverage goals that we need to really bring down costs and provide equity. So I think all you can focus on is doing the things. And listen, elections have consequences, you know, and he won the election, and he's got some very clear ideas about what he thinks the problems are in this country, and some ideas about the best way to solve them, and so he's going to work on those, and that's what he's focused on.
Antonio?
Yes, I'd like to go back to, you had mentioned a little bit about health care. The president had called on Congress to pass that bill, by the end of the summer. And as we know, that did not happen. What do you think actually happened with that bill that it didn't pass when the president wanted it to?
Well, I don't, you know, care about the timing at all. That's not important. That's kind of, sorry to say, kind of a creature of, you know, kind of the Washington mentality, which is to focus on something like that as opposed to the real substantive debate. So,
But the president set that goal. Yeah. He's the one who said it should pass by the end of summer.
If it passes in August, September, December, I mean, what matters is it gets passed. Congress is a Byzantine place that works quite slowly. You've got a lot of fiefdoms there, and I think there's no doubt that, you know, the pace of work has been much more aggressive than we normally see because he is pushing very hard. And it's not because he has some artificial deadline or because it's basically the sooner we can get this done, the sooner people stop getting denied health care coverage, the sooner we can begin to make sure people have access to coverage. In this economy, people who have had health care for a long time in their lives are losing it, and they can't get it, okay? This isn't about politics. This is about doing things that are going to lift up the country, particularly those middle-class workers who are struggling. So, but anyway, there's a long road still left. There'll be days where it looks like it's definitely going to happen and days where it doesn't. But you know, I have a high degree of confidence that enough people in Congress will meet the moment and we'll get health care reform. And that's going to matter to a lot of people out there because the anxiety about health care, which for years and decades has already been high, is just exploding right now. People who never worried before about whether they could afford it, who still have it, are panicked. They haven't had a raise in 3 years. They're having to pay more of health care. They've lost it. They don't have the ability, the access, or the affordability to get it. And, you know, in this country, that shouldn't be true. You know, I'm sure all of you know people who have sick kids, sick themselves, who aren't able to get the kind of treatment. There's nothing worse in life than not being able to provide health care for a loved one. And too many people right now, tens of millions of them, with tens of millions more, in jeopardy of doing that. And why are so many business leaders? By the way, many business leaders who did not support Barack Obama in 2008 and won't support him in 2012, why are they so passionate and working so hard on health care? Because they see it every day in their bottom line. It's crushing them. And by the way, obviously they're not competing anymore with a business across a state line. They're competing with people in India and China and South Korea and Japan. And their health care costs at the employer level are much, much lower, if there are at all. So it's killing our competitive ability in many respects. And no employer likes to tell their employees, we can't give you coverage anymore. You're going to have to pay more. The coverage plan we had that you liked that had dental, we can't offer that anymore. No one likes to do that. Many people are forced to do that now. And I think with health care reform, that we have the ability to see that happen a lot less.
David, do you still meet with the president? Does he?
No, I'm not going to get into my personal, you know, interaction. My favorite time with him this year, though, was we got to go to the All-Star game in St. Louis, where there was many Philadelphia Phillies playing, and Shane Victorino gave him some macadamia nuts from their shared homeland of Hawaii, home state of Hawaii. So But, and he got the ball across the plate, which was what was important.
Do you ever, you made a decision, obviously, and you mentioned your family life earlier, not to take a job in the administration at the beginning. You decided to stay out of government. You ever regret that?
No, not at all. I mean, anytime that I pick my son up at school at 3 p.m. and can spend some time with him and don't have to be on 12 conference calls, I don't regret it one bit. But I'd say this, the people in there, many of them from the campaign, new additions, are just remarkable folks who are doing great work for the president of the country. So the leadership there from Rahm Emanuel on down, I think is doing remarkable work under huge pressure, huge stakes. And, anytime I'm over there or talking to them, I'm just thrilled that they're part of this because I have great confidence in their character and their integrity. And also understanding why he ran, why he won. That's very important. He made some commitments to the American people and he's trying to follow through on them. And people like David Axelrod, who were here 2 years ago, are just 2 weeks ago are doing heroic work. He had too much grotto pizza when he was here, by the way. But other than that, it was a great event. He really enjoyed it.
One of the things I asked David when he was on the stage a couple weeks ago was whether he thought it was tougher to govern than it was to campaign. He's in government, so he's got a different perspective from yours. Do you think it is? Is it harder?
I don't think there's any doubt about it. I mean, I will tell you, trying to figure out a way to beat Hillary Clinton was pretty darn hard from where we started. But it pales in comparison to particularly now. You've got the economic crisis that is only rivaled in our country's history by the Great Depression. Obviously, you've got huge foreign policy challenges. We believe healthcare and energy are at a crisis point and we have to make quick progress. So it's hard. And, obviously, you just can't decide to do these things. You've got a Congress that you've got to work with. You've got governors you're trying to work with on implementation. So it's much harder. There's no question about that. But again, I think he's got the right metabolism for it. Because I think if you don't have kind of a long-term view and a clear sense of what you're trying to accomplish, it's hard to succeed in Washington because there's so many distractions. You have the media fascinations of the moment that can kind of, but if that's not your North Star, if your North Star is where you're trying to go on healthcare or energy or on these other challenges, then you've got a pretty good chance of staying the course. So, during the campaign, I think we would have all said there's nothing harder than this darn campaign. But I think governing is much, much more difficult.
Okay. Before you follow, let me just say that what we're going to do is we've already started, I see. We've got 2 microphones in the back of the auditorium. If you'd like to ask a question, make your way quietly to one of those microphones. Stand in the aisle against the back wall and the side walls so you don't block anybody in the center aisles from being able to see what's on the stage.
Now, are those all the young Republicans getting up, or are they, what is going on?
David said that he could identify you just by looking at you.
I was just kidding.
So while you're doing that, go ahead, Ashley, you have another question?
Yeah, just focusing on the campaign. I know you said right now, for the moment, you have a young family. Have you thought about being his campaign manager again in the future?
No, I think one of the healthy things about the entire enterprise is that, we aren't focused on the re-election at all. There will be a moment for that. Sadly, it's not too far from now. But listen, I think all of us have a deep loyalty to him. What role I play, I don't know. I know that generally in these things, I have great faith in him and fondness for him, and I understand that my hiatus here is not a permanent hiatus. Mm-hmm. I will have to put back on the uniform at some point. What I do, I don't know yet, but I know that we all, he inspires great loyalty, and it's one of the reasons we were effective in the campaign, is we were all rowing the boat in the same direction. Didn't have a lot of big egos, and we're kind of, I think, filled with a sense of mission and cause. And I think that remains for the people in government. And so, who knows? It's interesting in Washington now, people are trying to already predict what's going to happen in the 2010 elections. They're already starting to talk about 2012, who's the Republican nominee going to be, and, how's Obama going to do in this state? I mean, these elections are like 8,000 lifetimes from now. A lot's going to happen, a lot of twists and turns. And so I think we'll let the elections happen on the current pace. I will enjoy the Republican primary process as they kind of work out whatever identity crisis they're having to see who they're going to nominate and whether they're hard right, center right, Sarah Palin, who's in a whole different category. So I wish I could watch that as an observer with no interest in it, because I think it's really going to be a fascinating thing. it's already starting. But in 2011, the early part of 2012, to see what's happening in Iowa, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Michigan, the Republican Party is just going to be fascinating to watch.
You're not suggesting that it's too early to start thinking about what's going to happen in the 2010 elections, are you? It's October 2009.
No, but I think it's too early to say, oh, this is what's going to happen. They're going to win this many seats or that many seats. It's way too early for that. Trust me, having just gone through the election, in October, well, what's today? October 21st of 2007, we were given up for dead in the Democratic primary. The notion that we would beat Hillary Clinton, much less be elected president, was completely fanciful. People had basically said, you have no chance. So my point is, yeah, people running for Senate and governor and Congress, they're out there raising money and organizing, and they shouldn't do that. But I think there's kind of an instinct to try and say, here's what's going to happen. And, I think we all should just settle down and let the campaigns unfold on the proper time frame, and we'll know what's going to happen soon enough. And there's a lot of factors that will go into the next election, some of them atmospheric, some of them based on the individual candidates and campaigns. Did they run a good campaign? Were they the right fit for that state in the moment? And I think more and more, again, technology is good. I think campaigns are beginning to take on more of an individual flavor because more people have access to information than they did in the past.
All right, your turn. Let's see what we get from the field. Please, over here. And if I ask you, please, to identify yourself. It's a little hard for us to see you, so that way David will know who you are. Go ahead. Tap it.
Right.
There you go. Okay, here, now it's working.
I'm an assistant professor here, not so young anymore, not a Republican. So my question is, during the campaign, how did you, the team, and President Obama pay attention to different media outlets, including the mainstream news, CNN, Fox, conservative radio, and then also political satire like Jon Stewart's Daily Show and Saturday Night Live? So how do you decide what to pay attention to and what to ignore?
Yeah.
And maybe you could talk about a media-related victory and something that might have been a mistake.
Well, I think I'll just talk about the general election in terms of media. The truth is that, let's say, a true undecided swing voter in Toledo, Ohio, or Roanoke, Virginia, they do not watch cable news. They do not traffic on the internet in political commentary. And I think oftentimes, those of us that are involved in politics, that's the prism through which we see things. In many ways, it's a funhouse. It distorts reality because most of the country, so one of the, I think, strengths of our campaign is we did not evaluate the success of any day or any period based on what the commentators on cable news or on the blogs were saying. What we cared about was, okay, we sent Barack Obama to Toledo, Ohio today. What kind of coverage did we get? Because voters that we cared about were going to consume the local CBS or NBC story and read the Toledo Blade, whether online or offline. They weren't caring what, some of Ralph's old colleagues were saying on cable TV. And we put a huge premium on something that had nothing to do with media. People talking, a neighbor to a neighbor, a colleague to a colleague. As the distrust of the media and government and academic institutions, there's a crisis of trust out there. What people trust is their neighbor, their cousin, their colleague, a human being that they see life generally through the same eyes. So we spent a lot of time communicating directly to them so they'd understand if I was, getting coffee at the local coffee store and Ralph was there and Ralph's an undecided voter and I'm an Obama supporter and Ralph wanted to talk about health care, our supporters generally knew what to say about health care. And there's nothing more powerful than a human being talking to a human being. So, and there's no doubt that more and more people are getting information online. So we spent a lot of time, doing online interviews, making sure that we did a lot of internet advertising, which would, draw people to our website where they could get more fulsome information than a 30-second ad, for instance. So we spent a lot less time worrying about kind of the quote-unquote national news cycle of the day than we did in the battleground states. How do we do today in Toledo? And I think sometimes the McCain campaign seemed to care more about what the national narrative was, and that's why they put out these really negative ads, kind of snarky ads that the national media would kind of gravitate to and spend a lot of time talking about. But that's not what the voters that we thought would determine the election talked about. And that's a big change, a big change. And I think it's somewhat concerning because, again, I think so much of the debate in our politics is around kind of that national media prism, when in fact the voters are consuming things in a much different way. Local news and media continues to be very, very important. More and more people are getting it online, even TV. They'll go to KYW TV online instead of watching it on TV. But those are still very, very important. But our view is this. It's more difficult to reach people now, but you still then have to be everywhere people are. So we did do a lot of national TV interviews because some voters watched that. We did a lot of local TV interviews. We cared a lot about the coverage of our events. We tried to be all over the internet. We tried to be in your email box. We tried to be on your cell phone. We tried to be at your door. We tried to be at a community event. Because in this disparate world we're in right now, you never know how you're going to reach somebody. You can't be guaranteed anymore you'll reach them by talking to CBS or by doing even the local newspaper interview. You may not reach people, but you may reach them with a volunteer at a door, or they may be searching something about healthcare and they come to our website and read about our healthcare plan. So I think it's made things more complicated in a way, but you can't rue that. You just have to embrace it. And I think that goes for, it's non-politics too. Businesses who are trying to reach consumers, you've got to be in each of these buckets. You can't just be on TV anymore. Conversely, you just can't be online. You've got to be in everything. And I think one of the things we did well, I think, was our television advertising, which, it's premature to suggest that television advertising is going the way of the brontosaurus. It's not. It's still very, very important. But we did a lot of, I think, unusual things. We did 2-minute ads where President Obama would just be sitting in a chair like this, talking about the economy or about jobs, while McCain was hitting us with a fusillade of negative ads. And people really liked that because they got a sense of, okay, he's positive and he's actually talking to us with some specificity as opposed to a 30-second ad. Now that meant we ran less 30-second ads in some weeks than our opponent was, so we were gambling that the value of that more fulsome approach would pay off, and I think it did. You might remember we did a 30-minute ad, which was about stories of people in America on jobs and healthcare. Again, a fairly controversial thing that worked. I think that we did some smart things. And we ignored things. You might remember McCain spent some time attacking us for being an empty-suited celebrity. I think he compared us to Britney Spears and Paris Hilton. And, we didn't really engage on that. And we were criticized for that. People said, is he getting swift-boated like John Kerry was? Why doesn't he hit back? But our sense was that wasn't working. And I think that's an important part of politics is, yes, you have to respond and you've got to respond quickly, but you also have to know when not to respond and how to respond. I think we proved that you don't have to always go lower than your opponent, that if you elevate the dialogue, at least in this election, there was a lot of receptivity to it. So, and the president now, has gotten some criticism for going on, Jay Leno and Letterman and doing, live web chats, but it's how you reach people today. It's the world we live in. You're not going to reach everybody from the podium of the White House in a news conference anymore. You've got to use all these different tools available to you.
Questioner also asked a couple of other aspects. I'm only going to pick 2 of them to follow up on because you didn't touch on them. One is how important are you talked about Leno and so on in the present context, but how important, for example, was The Daily Show in the campaign? And she also asked, was there a media failure that you'd like to tell us about that you kind of regret doing something the wrong way?
Well, I'd say, listen, if you look at the ratings for a Jon Stewart, they're not huge, but what that does not really capture is a lot of people watch shows like The Daily Show online, or they share clips by email. It's a huge multiplier effect. So I think, and a lot of younger folks tend to watch Jon Stewart. And so I think that his coverage, I happen to enjoy his coverage because I think he, if any of you, he put together a great 8-minute video around the economic crisis and what some of the economic commentators had said about buying Bear Stearns and AIG, and it just kind of laid bare a lot of things. So I think he has a lot of credibility. People like him with younger folks. I do think, obviously, Tina Fey's, portrayal of Sarah Palin was something that, was a phenomenon in the campaign. And from our perspective, what it did was it just shined a spotlight on McCain's decision. The truth is voters are always more sophisticated than they're given credit for. Nobody out there said, well, maybe some base Obama voters did, but swing voters never said, boy, I didn't like Sarah Palin's interview with Katie Couric, or Tina Fey's impression really is on the mark, so I'm not going to vote for John McCain. What voters always said was, hey, I'm concerned about Sarah Palin's interview. Why did McCain pick her? What does it say about John McCain? So, I think that there were times when I think whenever we didn't have, sometimes we went too long without having press conferences or, I think Obama was our best asset. So the more we had him out doing longer form interviews, the better off we were. And I think there were stretches of the campaign probably where we didn't do enough of that. And so that would be one instance. And I think generally, one thing we learned, the media in the primary, you might recall, it took them a long time to understand that we had a strong position in the race. And that caused some angst amongst our supporters, because every day they're reading, well, you guys say you're on track, but the press is saying something else. And we learned from that, so that in the general election, we communicated directly by email to our supporters about our political strategy. So when the commentators were criticizing us for contesting Indiana or North Carolina, Virginia, we had told our supporters why we were doing that. And we should have done that in the primary, because, in the primary it was like, well, Obama's putting all his eggs in the Iowa basket. He probably won't win it, but if he does, it's not really going to matter. And we kind of fought that out in the media instead of like emailing our supporters directly and saying, hey, we just want to lay out for you exactly what we're thinking. That was a big mistake we made. And we learned from that, because you want people not to be, overly ridden with angst about the strategy. You want them to kind of, whether it's raising money, registering voters, organizing, recruiting volunteers, you want them focused on that task with some comfort that the overall strategy is smart. May not work, there's no guarantee it works, and we didn't do that in the primary. That was a big mistake, and I think a failure of us to understand kind of the new way that people consume information.
All right, let's go over here to the mic, please.
I wanted to know...
Could you identify yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Thad Nagy, and I'm a senior at the University of Delaware. And I wanted to know your three biggest challenges, difficulties in the campaign, and how you processed and delivered the win with those challenges.
It's tough to pick three. It really is. So I'll try and pick some that are a little bit diverse. The first would be just getting this enterprise off the ground. You have to understand, most people who run for president plan to do so for years. They build a staff that's going to be in place. They travel to Iowa, New Hampshire. They have their fundraising base in place. Increasingly, you have an email base. We didn't have any of that. He kind of jumped into this, very unconventionally at the last minute. And we weren't running against, anyone. We were running against Hillary Clinton. She was a behemoth. She had organization and support in every state, and it was deep and it was strong. And so we really thought we had 60 days to either make this enterprise solid enough, or we would never get the plane off the ground. So just simply getting the enterprise off the ground. Wow, we were a fascination in the beginning. People didn't think we had much chance to win, but the moment we said we were going to run for president, we had reporters in Indonesia, at Occidental College, at Columbia, in Springfield, Illinois, all over us, and our opponents were too. So we're kind of like, trying to build a campaign while we're taking all this incoming, all this questions, a very challenging period. And, there were days where it looked dicey. So we got the plane off the ground. Secondly, I would say, was dealing with a loss in New Hampshire. I can assure you our plan for how to become the Democratic nominee and president of the United States did not include losing the New Hampshire primary. And I think the way we recovered from that is probably the thing I'm proudest about in the whole campaign. And I will tell you, I didn't sleep at all that night thinking about how the hell are we going to do this now? The one thing we thought we needed was that propulsion out of New Hampshire, because again, she was a huge front runner. She had huge leads in all the states, like Delaware that voted on February 5th. We thought we needed huge momentum. We had just lost it. And if you talk to anybody in politics, I'm sure Ralph talked to some reporters, they all thought it's over. Obama had his moment in Iowa. It was a very nice moment. It's over. Order has been restored. And so we clawed back from that. And South Carolina, coupled with the Kennedy endorsement, gave us the kind of momentum we needed, working in conjunction with something that was really a quiet strength we'd built. We were better organized, more strategic, and actually had more money than Hillary Clinton on February 5th. So you marry that with momentum, and we just had enough to not just survive February 5th, but to win more states and delegates. Then I'd say, the Palin pick, which worked out pretty well for us. She ended up being our best fundraiser and organizer. I probably should have given her my title. She did a lot of the work for us. But, that was challenging because, it was a moment, right? There was a media fascination with her, rightly so. Everybody thought the race had changed, and a lot of criticism about us. We weren't attacking her. We should be attacking her. And I think that we had a stability there. Again, going back to Obama's long-term perspective, let's just ride this out. Let's ride this out. They'll have their moment. And at the end of the day, this will probably work for us because it will look like a political pick and a very haphazard one. So that was very tough. And then I'd say that dealing with the economic crisis, which probably ended up being a favorable political climate for us, was really hard. You're trying to run for president, which is an awfully hard thing to do. And then you've got this economic crisis. And so your candidate's spending hours on the phone with economic advisors and Paulson and Bernanke. It made things really hard. Time is the most precious commodity in politics. And not to mention, you begin to think, well, if we win this thing, my goodness, what a mess is ahead of us. But we kind of put that aside. So many tough moments. So many tough moments. And Reverend Wright, of course, was something that, was probably the greatest threat to our candidacy, I'd say after losing the New Hampshire primary. And that was a moment where, we didn't follow the political playbook. Our candidate made a decision about how to deal with that. And I think it was a brilliant thing to do. And it was high risk. But he went out there and gave the kind of speech that even if people still were bothered by Wright, and a lot of them were, they appreciated how he dealt with it. And they'd often say, that's what's different about him. Not many political figures would have given that speech. They would have just tried to kind of play four corners and outrun the thing and hope it goes away, instead of elevating it and making it the dominant theme of the campaign for a long period of time. And so that was a tough one. Those were rough days, and we did not prepare for Wright properly. The fact that we had not watched every sermon he had given is unforgivable, but we didn't do it, and we paid the price for it.
David, I'm going to pose a couple of questions from Second Life. We have a question from California and one from Canada. They're on different subjects. Maybe you can just briefly answer each of them if you wish. From California, the question is, what is your opinion on publicly funded campaigns? And just for the sake of fleshing out the question, everybody ought to remember, of course, that candidate Obama decided against using public funding for his campaign. What's the future of that? And then the other question is from Canada is, would you care to offer a projection about whether the U.S. will sign the Global Warming Treaty?
I'll answer the last one yet. I won't hazard a guess. I will say this. I think that, again, I think strengthening our relationship with the rest of the world gives us a better opportunity to solve global challenges. I think that he has shown great leadership here, even irrespective of legislation, around things like auto efficiency standards, putting a real focus on green jobs that I think is going to be helpful for this country, helpful in our cooperative. You're not going to solve this problem alone. It's going to be solved by the world. But there's a lot of complicated issues. So I think that I have a great deal of confidence that his leadership is going to provide great progress on the environment here. Just as importantly, I think it's going to be a huge economic driver. What happens in Copenhagen, we'll see. On public funding, it was a tough decision because he's been a reformer, both in Springfield and in Washington. But we felt, first of all, that we had achieved in our campaign kind of the goal of reform. Okay, the first nominee in the history of the United States of America not to accept money from lobbyists or PACs. A very, very big deal. And John McCain, who was Mr. Campaign and Finance Reform, was swimming in them. We had 4 million people give money. The two categories of people that gave us the most contributions were not lobbyists, of course, because we didn't take it, not lawyers, not doctors, not insurance company executives. They were retirees and students, given 5, 10, 15, 20. So we thought we had really achieved it.
That's the most contributions. What about the most money? What sector? You indicated most number of contributions. Yeah. What about
I can't remember
largest
sector.
Amount of money?
I mean,
no.
we had a pretty good balance. I mean, you had, you did have some lawyers. You had a lot of retirees. You had a lot of educators, a lot of healthcare professionals who feel really strongly about healthcare reform. So it was a pretty broad category. And we had to make a decision about the best way to run the campaign, and we wanted control of our campaign. And we wanted to make, because what you saw with Kerry and Bush and Gore and Bush is basically their campaign is the minor financial actor. The National Party spends more money than the campaign, and you raise it in bigger chunks. So the nominees, instead of asking people for $50 or $2,000, are asking people for $30,000, $40,000. Our sense was, that's not the kind of, that's how we don't want to fund campaigns. And these outside groups, where people can start an entity tomorrow and write a $10 million check and pollute the airwaves. And we dealt with a lot of that in the campaign. So we thought, you know what, we're going to try and run this campaign our own. It's going to take a lot of money, but there was much less outside activity in the Democratic Party than there's historically been because of the decision we made. And I think that was good for our democracy. I think it gave us control of the campaign. So I think hopefully what you're going to see in Congress is some reforms, which means probably some of the levels have to be increased. There probably should be much more of an incentive for low-dollar fundraising. So if you are going to get, help from the federal government in voluntary checkoff, it's linked to raising small dollar money. And so I hopefully there'll be some reforms before the next presidential election. So that, and well, I tell you, one of the great things about our campaign is, we had to spend some time doing traditional fundraising, but much less than most candidates because we were funded by people. So our candidate could spend a lot of time just on the ground talking to voters as opposed to, having to do an enormous amount of fundraising. We still had to do some of it. But, I think you're going to have to see fundamental reform. And listen, I don't know how to solve the problem of outside money. The Supreme Court may come down with a ruling soon that's going to open back up the spigot. And that's a real problem because you're going to have wealthy interests spending tens of millions of dollars in Senate and governor's races and House races. And it's very shadowy. One person can do it. One industry can do it. Voters have a tough time deciphering who's behind the money. So that, I'm very worried about that because I think it's a problem for our democracy. And by the way, this is not just a Democrat. There's plenty of Republicans, including John McCain, who shares this view that it's a concern.
All right, let's go over here for a question.
My name is Andrew Edwards. I'm a junior majoring in political science here at the University of Delaware. My question to you is, as you have said many times, the campaign wished to move away from more traditional forms of media and news, going to the internet, emailing people directly, that sort of thing, in an attempt to prevent them being mired down in any of the peculiarities and such that might happen. So my question is this: do you believe it's right that within the past week, senior officials within the Obama administration have come out and criticized the Fox News channel?
Well, I'd say first, we spent an inordinate amount of time in the campaign dealing with the mainstream media. My point is that when you communicate directly with people or reach them through other means, that's not a substitute for the mainstream media. The mainstream media still has an important and valuable role to play in political coverage and coverage of government. And I think that, they ask probing questions, and you've got a lot of voters who still consume mainstream media. So for us, it wasn't in substitute for, it was just in addition to, that you have to acknowledge that the way campaigns used to be run, interviews with the mainstream media, voters getting all their information from mainstream media, that's changed a little bit, but a lot still do. So listen, my personal view is I agree what's been said. I think that much of Fox is opinion-based journalism, and I think to treat it as otherwise is a mistake. I mean, I saw that in the campaign. If you look at Fox's coverage, it was a little bit more responsible and balanced, let's say through the spring and summer. But clearly a decision was made, and really from mid-September on, it was completely obvious what was going on. It was the Acorn Network 24/7. It was Right, it was Ayers. And we still put people on Fox, and the administration still does that. But I feel very strongly that, you have to understand, because obviously you want to make sure that people understand that what you're seeing on Fox, at least in major elements of Fox, is not straight news coverage. It's got a point of view. And I think that was the right thing to raise, because I think their coverage, in some cases has been fairly irresponsible, it's clearly slanted. And that's clear not just in the evening hours, probably when it's most pronounced. Now, I don't follow it as closely as I did during the campaign, but even in the campaign, if you watched Fox from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., it was very clear that there was a very determined and clear agenda, and that basically, we were shouting into the wind. So, I think it's relevant what's been happening, and I think obviously everybody can decide on their own. They can watch Fox, they can watch CNN, they can live online, they can decide what information is factual and is really down the middle or has a point of view. But I think there's no question that in the case of Fox, they've clearly crossed a boundary.
All right, let's go over to this side, please.
Good evening, Mr. Plouffe. My name is Nathan Paul, and I'm actually a junior biology major. And the question I had was actually regarding the situation in Afghanistan. And I guess it actually arises from a visit from Greg Mortensen early in the semester. And one of the things he said in his book, Three Because with He, was that he pulled out like an example. So he said that, all these air drone attacks that the U.S. is doing in Pakistan and in Afghanistan or wherever to kill these Taliban insurgents and Al-Qaeda insurgents, he says, it costs, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And many times you have innocent people who are killed. And he says that, the question he poses is that if you had given him that money, he could have used that money to build 50 schools. And so he says, which would be a better weapon to fight against the Taliban? And so I guess what I'm asking is that, with President Obama considering pulling out troops from Afghanistan, especially against General McChrystal's, urging to send more troops in, what do you think is President Obama's view of success in Afghanistan? Is it to, completely wipe Taliban into oblivion, or is it to rebuild Afghanistan, the communities in Afghanistan?
Well, again, there are very sensitive and important discussions going on. I'm not going to wade into them. I think those discussions are happening at the highest levels of our government, at the administration level, obviously in conjunction with the military. So I, as a civilian, am not going to wade into that and would not, offer myself as an expert on that. So I apologize for that, but I don't think it's responsible for me to do so.
Okay. And we'll go back over here.
My name's
It's a great book, by the way, and he does great work. I will say that, Mortensen.
Greg Mortensen, okay.
my name's David Parkinson. I'm a senior political science and economics major here at the university. First, I did want to say Jason Worth hit a 3-run home run.
Are you serious?
3-1, yes. Bottom of the first.
Hey, where's that Dodgers fan?
Bottom of the what?
Bottom
Maybe
of the
Manny's
first.
in the shower already.
Figured I would share that. And so my question is, I know it's a little far to look towards 2012.
Now, if you ask me an easy question, you've got a job. You deliver good news, you ask an easy question. This is good stuff.
That's a tough question. I guess my question would be, in 2009, where we've seen two particularly, I guess it would be close or important races, Creed Deeds in Virginia and John Corzine in New Jersey, I was wondering what you thought the importance of the groundwork that you laid during the Obama campaign in 2008 is to those races. And then I was also wondering, this is a tweet from Ben Smith, who's a Politico correspondent. President Obama said earlier today, quote, "Your voice can change the world, your voice can elect John Corzine," to which he responded, "Second sentence was kind of a letdown, huh?" So I was wondering if you thought that there was a point in which there's sort of this fatigue of the Obama campaign getting out there and supporting this thing, and it ends up taking away from the accomplishment that you had in 08.
Well, it's a really interesting question. I'd say this. First of all, I think that there will be a lot of attention and time spent on what these elections mean to 2010, 2012. I've always found this to be a completely overblown dynamic. You know, in 2001, Democrats won the New Jersey governor's race after being out of power for a long time. We won the Virginia governor's race, and the Republican Party had a terrific 2002. And in 2004, George Bush won the presidency, and Virginia wasn't competitive at all. So, you know, I think you're looking at close races in both states. There's also a special election in New York. I mean, and listen, we've walked the walk. We won some special elections congressionally earlier this year. You did not see any of us say, hey, this really means a lot. This is a harbinger for 2010. Every election, every candidate, every moment is unique. And so I think what the president's doing is he believes John Corzine and Creed Deeds would be good governors for the people of that state, good partner in what he's trying to do. We're encouraging people who helped us in the election to help out there. But every election's unique. You know, people often say, well, if you don't win the Virginia governor's race in 2009, or if you lose congressional seats in 2010, or win them, or win Creed Deeds, what does that mean for Virginia? What if you win? Does that mean you'll definitely win 2012? You know, ask me about our Virginia, you know, prospects in 2012, the night of the election in 2012. That's when I'll be able to tell you whether it's worked or not. So I think that, but every election's different, you know, and we put together a little bit different winning coalition than some other people might. We, young voters, explosive turnout in battleground states, African-American turnout reaching historic highs, winning 13, 14% of the Republican vote in states like Indiana, Florida. That might be a different coalition than a senator or governor might put together. So I think every election's unique, And I think the president's obviously advocating for people that he think would be good public servants and good partners. But, you know, we don't certainly have a responsibility to remake the Democratic Party. He's there to solve big problems, not to, you know, engage in some kind of Karl Rove-like scheme to win elections for years and years and years. Every election is different. Listen, our re-election will be different in many respects. I can't tell you today how it will be, but I just know that it will be. And so I think there'll be too much attention paid to that. But every race is unique. Every race is unique. Every candidate's unique. The campaigns they run are unique. What's going on environmentally, I don't mean from a green perspective, but just atmospherically, issue-wise. So, and I think if you study politics and get involved with it, that's a very important lesson to understand. You've got to look at every election through a very clear and new set of eyes. And I think that's one of the things that benefited from us. You know, we didn't look at 2004 and 2000 and 1996, even going back to John Kennedy's race. We studied them all, but we weren't bound by them. You know, we thought we could win Indiana, even though history suggests we'd have no chance. We thought we could win North Carolina, even though history suggests, because we looked at things differently. We kind of set preconceived notions aside. And so, you know, I think you're going to see close races in all these states. I'm sure you're going to see a lot of close elections next year. But I think it'll be, and again, so if we have great outcomes in these elections, you're not going to see me or anybody else involved in the administration going out there and saying what a huge deal this is and this really means 2000. No, because we have a healthy, and I think political operatives in both parties kind of understand that. But they're fascinating, you know, they're going to be fascinating finishes here in both states. Thanks for the Phillies update.
Does he get a job? I'm just kidding. You don't have to answer that question.
If you announce another home run before 9 o'clock, yes.
Okay, question from Second Life from Washington State. Do you want to comment on the president's position on the free trade issue?
Not specifically in terms of current legislation. I know that, you know, he talked about the campaign a lot, that obviously trade is very, very important. And I think, you know, both he and Hillary mentioned there was a period in the campaign, I think around the Ohio primary, when they both said, you know, their language and rhetoric was probably not as reflective of their, I think, nuanced and, you know, clear views on this. I think this is an issue that sometimes, you know, the politics of it become a little bit complicated. I think he's someone who believes in free trade. As a senator, basically his view is he's going to support trade deals that he thinks make sense, that have the right worker and environmental protections and human rights, and he did support them and got a lot of criticism from the base of our party for doing that. He opposed some trade deals that he think didn't meet that test. So I think he's going to be someone who's a huge and active proponent of trade, but trade done in the right way. And I think that's the right way to approach this. And by the way, I think that there's a majority in Congress in both parties who believe that. There's some in the Democratic Party that want to oppose all trade deals. There's some in the Republican Party that want to support any trade deal no matter how flawed it is. I think the majority of people in Congress say, we need trade, it's important for growth, let's just make sure it's done in the right way.
So Washington's not broken on that front?
Well,
Congress is not Byzantine on that front?
Well, I mean, obviously we've you know, we'll see, but I don't think so. No, listen, I think that, you know, most people run for office and take office with the best of intentions. But I think that, you know, the town is very political. And I think that, again, you know, sort of the short-term dynamic can overturn long-term dynamic. But I do think most people in both parties, they can have very divergent views on a lot of things, but they run with the best intentions in mind.
Okay, let's go over here. Another question?
Steve Onger, a political science graduate, 2007. The campaign had done a very good job getting across the point that change was coming, change was here, change being the big overall objective. A lot of changes happened, and politics is hard, change is hard to do. A lot of concern has been raised that the amount of change that has been done so far has not met what the campaign has promised. Do you at all feel that the change that was promised was possibly set too high, that too much was promised that might not be able to be fulfilled? Obviously, we're not going to be able to see how much change is done until the end of the term or even further, but do you feel that that there was too much emphasis put on so many issues to put change over the top that it may not all be accomplished and may in the end hurt either Obama's political ratings or that of other areas such as into Congress and other parts of the Democratic Party?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question. I think that you know, when he offered change, it wasn't with the idea that all the benefits of the change and progress would be evidenced by the next election or the one after that or even the one after that. I think you're right to say you're not going to know until the end of his term, and in some cases much later than that. As again, he said on nuclear weapons the other day, this is something that's not going to be probably accomplished in his presidency or certainly even his lifetime. So these are longer term things. Here's what I think. And so I think, listen, the economy is coming back in many important ways. We have far too few people. We have far too many people out of work, no doubt about that. And I think he's trying to do everything he can to help address that. Healthcare reform and energy challenges remain active debates. I have confidence about both of them, but they haven't been enacted. And even when they do, you know, the positive benefit of it's going to take some time. So, but here's what I think has happened in a short period of time. One, I think a lot of middle-class voters think that they have a voice again, that the decisions are being made there, whether they agree with them all or disagree with them all, that basically says, you know, they're trying to, you know, enact some policies, make some changes aimed at me. And I can't tell you how many people out there thought their voice no longer mattered, that, you know, they weren't part of the equation, that this is all some cooked deal between the wealthy special interests and the lobbyists, and they were left out in the cold. So I think there's hope about that. I think that, you know, some of the change about how Washington does business at the executive branch, obviously congressional is different, but the openness, the transparency, I think people really value that. I think the way our relationship with the rest of the world is changing, which was a big driver in the election, by the way. A lot of people voted for Barack Obama because they valued that, is happening. I think the sense that we have a president who's trying not to duck tough problems is something that is immensely important to people. Immensely important. Because even though everyone's got different ideas about the solutions, the American people know on health care, on energy, on doing the financial regulatory things to make sure that doesn't happen again. We've got to change. And I think they admire that, and they know he's doing tough political things. So change is going to be hard. Some of the changes will begin to materialize in our lives very, very soon. Some of them already have. Some of them will be years, if not decades. But I think what he offered was someone who's going to put the middle class first, someone who's going to duck tough challenges, someone who's going to try and open up government a little bit more to the American people. And I think on those big, important attributes, I think he's delivered, is trying to deliver, but there's no doubt it's hard. But I think he's off to a great start.
Okay, over here on this, ma'am, why don't you get in line behind the students and you'll, or whoever, and take your place in line. Go ahead.
My name is Jason. I'm a senior here, political science. And my question is something I think you're kind of uniquely prepared to answer. Obviously, this campaign kind of saw a new use of all this information technology that has exploded onto the scene recently with the basic information revolution. And that was great. I loved how the campaign used all these things, podcasts, YouTube, etc. How do you think the Obama campaign has used it thus far? The Obama administration has used it thus far, and how are they going to uniquely use it in the future to the best of their advantage?
Well, I think that, first of all, we talked a little bit about he's obviously doing interviews and having interactions in what would be considered usually non-traditional ways. You know, doing live web chats, and obviously, you know, his radio address is no longer a radio address, it's a YouTube address. And, you know, appearing on some of the late night programs. So I think that's very important. We continue to communicate by email with a huge segment of the American population directly, so that, you know, the president can talk in a video or through a text email about what he's doing on health care, ask people to get involved. That's never really happened in our politics before, and so that's really, really important. From a campaign perspective, all I know is a lot of what we did in 2008 that looked revolutionary in the not-too-distant future will look prehistoric. You know, we send emails to people, and they open it up on their, you know, laptop or their desktop. And, you know, 8 years from now, people will say, what's that, Jurassic Park? Because everyone's going to be watching video and getting messages on their cell phone. Everybody. It's coming like a freight train. And that makes, you know, me salivate. A campaign that really prided getting people involved and sharing information, that makes it so easy. You don't have to be anchored to do that. Be walking down the street, get a video you like, and you can send it out to your entire address book. So things are going to change in fundamental ways. And I think media will continue to have a very important role, mainstream media, but it will continue to get more fractured the way people get information. New technologies will emerge. Think about it. In our campaign, Twitter was barely around. It was barely around. And so we'll see what is out there. I mean, one of the, I think, strengths of our campaign is we had a lot of people organizing for us on Facebook, no doubt. But we had our own social networking site, and it became a home for people. I think that's an important lesson. I'd say two things about this. Whether you're a political campaign, a college, a business, we all spend so much of our time online, right? And I think if you're on Amazon.com, you're on Zappos.com, you're on Yelp, you're on whatever you guys go on, right, that I don't even know, CNN.com. If your then experience with the political website or the university website or the business website is deficient, doesn't have all the same tools, doesn't have the freshness, doesn't appeal to you design-wise, people are going to stop going there. So that's one of the great things about our campaign is we did not approach the digital space as, hey, let's do the best political website. No, let's do something that could compete with, you know, Yahoo and Amazon. And, you know, I'm sure we were deficient in some ways, but generally people had a good experience. Really important to have that in mind. And that you want to create a home for people. We wanted to create a place where people could go there and get any information, learn anything about the campaign, do anything for us they wanted to. You might remember when we announced Joe Biden, we did it by text message. Another thing we did, by the way, not getting in the public system financially. The pick of Joe Biden, many other instances, we did not do it traditionally, which is to send out a press release or have someone like me do a conference call with political reporters. We sent it to people directly, and boy, they loved it. They felt valued and informed, and we could, you know, control the message directly in that instance. And I think that that dynamic is only going to increase. But on Joe Biden, we said, okay, you're the first to know Joe Biden, but we said, watch Obama and Biden's first event, you know, at 2 p.m. today, not on CNN, not on ABC, not on, you know, Yahoo.com. Watch it on BarackObama.com. You know, we wanted people to go there for everything so that they would develop a relationship with us digitally, and many, many people did. And I think that's important for any nonprofit, anybody that's trying to rally people online. And more often, you know, the online is basically the way to organize people to do offline things. You know, a lot of our work was done offline, but it's how we organize people to do it. You've got to create a home for people so they go there all the time. They feel comfortable. There's an ease of use. They know that it's going to be updated frequently. The tools make sense to them. Our website, from inception to end, changed in huge ways. And almost all of the changes, whether it was a design change, whether it was a content change, whether it was a change of a tool, always came not from people like me in the campaign. It came from our volunteers out there who were using it. We said, hey, your phone tool could be improved. Or why do I have to hunt around for how do I respond to the Obama's a Muslim email? Make it easy for me. So we listened to them because they were out there using the thing. And that was really important. And we got great feedback from folks. And so anyway.
David, I'm going to follow up on that, if I may. And I have to telegraph the fact that I'm having a difficult time phrasing this question, okay? So forgive me if I blow it. Suppose you were on the outside. You weren't behind that keyboard sending out those email messages. You're an outsider, you're a citizen, and you're receiving messages, and everybody in the room is receiving messages from Richard Nixon, from George W. Bush. And now I'm making a stretch, and I'm not making any analogies or anything of that kind, but just to go to the ultimate extreme to make the point in the question. Suppose in the 1930s people had been receiving those messages from Joseph Goebbels or Adolf Hitler. How would you react to that idea about we want them to live on that site, we want to control the message directly? Would you react as positively to that kind of situation as you just did in your
Well, I'm not going to get into the 30s and Goebbels, but
Right.
I'd say this. What I was talking about is our supporters, okay? So people who are out there who are helping us organize their communities. They're raising money. They're helping spread the message. It was a way for them to go online and have all the information they need to help the campaign. And so when I say communicate directly with them, it's so they understood when they're knocking on someone's door and someone says, hey, I saw this Joe the plumber guy saying Obama's a socialist and wants to, you know, raise my taxes. They knew what to say. They knew how to answer that. They would answer it in their own language. One of the things we didn't do is we really didn't script our volunteers, very unusual in politics, because we thought the most authentic communication was someone talking from here about why they were for Barack Obama. And of course, we hope that they understood how to talk about his tax cut plan or health care, but if they could talk about health care in a personal way, or if they were a small business owner and they thought Obama would be better for them economically, that's always more powerful than, hi, I'm David Plouffe, I'm here with the Obama campaign. It just is inauthentic. So what we were trying to do was, this isn't the whole nation. We were trying to empower our volunteers so that they understood what was going on in the campaign, that they understood how to use the tools to help the campaign, that they understood how to get information, and that we could communicate directly with them, not through the filter of the news media, where obviously they would read stories and whatnot, but say, okay, here's the content and message of our healthcare plan. Here's why we think targeting North Carolina and Florida is important. Here's how to respond to the Joe the Plumber thing. Here's how to respond to Sarah Palin's latest missive. So we were basically empowering our, and I think that, any nonprofit out there or people who are trying to rally people, tends to do the same thing. We just had very committed volunteers who were out there making a big difference in the campaign. And I think technology in many ways empowered them to be as productive as they could be for us.
Okay, ma'am, go ahead, your turn.
My name is Janet and I'm a parent. I want to ask, as part of your campaign, did you, since medical coverage was very important, did you form any professional discovery team to study the health in this country and to study the health in also all sectors in the rest of the world for the campaign? And I'm saying that because I bought my own health insurance for almost 5 years. I spent $20,000, then I have to cancel it because it got very expensive. Also, I lived in other countries in the world, in Jordan, where it got a lot of money from the USA, it relies on the USA. But I knew they had certain things that I never even appreciated when I was there. I was young. The doctors who get help from the government.
Ma'am, do you have a question?
They get to work for the government for several years, and that's how they provide public health.
Ma'am, what's your question?
I want to ask if he has studied the health system in the USA and in the world to see what good, successful story he can do in the new system.
All right.
Well, I think, during the campaign, we obviously offered a health care plan with some detail. The president was very involved in the development of that. He got very involved in policy in the campaign. We had a lot of healthcare experts who I'm sure, have knowledge of the rest of the world. We've got states here that are doing various things, some with great success, so Hawaii, Massachusetts, other states. So, ideas from the healthcare sector, ideas from the business sector. Healthcare is an issue that affects every single one of us, both from a healthcare standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint. So, and they're continuing to do that now. You have obviously got examples around the world. You've got examples in states. You've got insurance cooperatives that have been tried. You've got a lot of great evidence out there. And obviously, you can't always translate what may be happening in a state to the country. It's not that simple. But I think that they are looking at a lot of best practices and a lot of debate going on. And listen, I think that this is something where, for some people, healthcare, they've got great healthcare. Their employer's still paying for a lot of it. They're lucky enough to still get raises. They haven't had anybody in their family denied coverage. But, in this country, sadly, that's a minority. And I think that most people out there, and you guys who are students will know this soon enough, when you're out there, on your own, we just can't keep doing what we're doing. And, healthcare costs now for families next year are projected to rise another 10%. Think about that. Most people losing jobs, not getting wages, and healthcare costs going to rise 10% for the family. How are people going to come up with the finances? And for business costs, it's going, and obviously as a percentage of our deficit. So I think that it's just a critical issue, and there are a lot of great examples of smart things that are happening out there. You can also learn from mistakes that are happening in other parts of the country for sure. So, it's a package that I think has contained a lot of great ideas from a lot of thought leaders and people who are actually in the fray day-to-day healthcare-wise.
Okay, are you going to make an announcement? Because I'm not going to let you ask another question.
I should note that Pedro Feliz hit another home run for the Phillies, so it's now 4-2 in the middle of the...
Oh, you didn't say anything about the two. Oh, okay, well, that's good.
Another home run on the
4-2, that's great.
Okay, ma'am, go ahead.
Hi, my
That's
name's
great.
My name's Joanna James Parks. I'm a freshman communications major. My question was,
how worried were you, or how much of a concern was it to the Obama campaign about how saturated the media was with Obama advertisements and with Obama talks and podcasts and so on, that people were going to get overwhelmed with that message, especially when your opponent really couldn't compete with the media buy? So.
Well, I think actually, if you look at our campaign, for most of August, parts of September, McCain was outspending us. And most of the spending on our behalf was done by us. As I said, it was under the Obama for America umbrella. It is true that we outspent the McCain campaign. But if you add in the Republican National Committee, if you add in the outside groups, the spending disparity was not as severe as they would have liked you to believe. In fact, there were markets at the end of the campaign where we were getting outspent, big markets. So, you know, I think it's a convenient excuse for why they didn't do that well. Now, maybe they were. Now, if you look at, we tried to be everywhere. So we did TV, we did radio, something our party, I think, generally has not done enough of. We did a lot of rural radio, a lot of faith radio. We tried to reach people any way we could. We had a balanced approach so that, you know, if you were paying a lot of attention to the election, you know, in a battleground state, there's another ad, there's another email, there's another internet advertisement. But a lot of people who would decide this election from a swing voter perspective, you know, it's harder to reach them. So, and listen, we tried to build campaigns in these battleground states that we didn't want to leave any stone unturned. We said, we want to think about everything we can do to win the election. Not because we wanted to sit around and pat our backs about winning the election. We felt so strongly that we had to win the election. Now, obviously, there's people who voted for McCain, supported McCain, who thought otherwise. But from where we sat, we said, we cannot lose this election. So we are going to do everything we can think of. Now, some of that's financial, no doubt. But I think the most important asset we had was people who were out there. Why, by the way, did a 45-year-old African-American man in Philadelphia vote for the first time? Well, of course, he had to be inspired somewhat by Obama. But we thought, almost assuredly, it was because his cousin or his brother or sister said, I'm going to register and vote for the first time. You should too. Why did a college student in North Carolina get involved in politics for the first time, even though they thought they never would? Generally because someone in their peer group got involved. Why did the Republican diner owner in Anderson, Indiana vote for us? Well, it was probably, you know, obviously maybe like Obama's health care plan or tax cut plan. But part of it was also his Republican neighbor said, hey, I think I'm going to vote for Obama. Maybe you should too. You know, we put a huge premium on that. So yes, we did a lot of television advertising. We did a lot of internet advertising. We did a lot of mail. So did the other side. But I think the thing we really had in excess over our opponent was that happening on the ground, where in every community, in every battleground state, we had local people who were out there knocking on doors, making phone calls to their neighbors. Some of you might have done this, talking about the campaign, convincing people to vote for Obama. And it's a very, very powerful thing.
All right, we're going to take one more question from over here, and then I'll come back to the stage for the last question. Go ahead.
Earlier this evening, you said that John McCain picked Sarah Palin as a running mate, and look what that says about John McCain. Basically, you know, what the president said in one of the presidential debates with John McCain was, you want to know about me, you want to know about how I think, judge me by the people I surround myself with. This week, my question is, as a former campaign manager and a political strategist, is it wise for President Obama to be campaigning this week with Senator Chris Dodd, whose own newspaper, the New Haven Register, in March of this year called him a, quote, lying weasel, whose lie about the AIG bonus loophole should haunt him next year when he seeks re-election, who has broken a bond with voters.
Why don't you not read the entire article? Okay, we got your gist. You got your point.
Okay, so he is campaigning rigorously for Senator Dodd this week at a $1,000 plate dinner. Your reply?
Well, that's obviously the opinion of one editorial. You could go to a lot of states about a lot of elected officials and find similar things, so I wouldn't overplay that. That's a nice tactic, but one that's, I think, largely transparent. So, you know, I think Chris Dodd is someone who's been a real advocate for families and children. who's been a leader in education and someone the President and I share this view, should be returned to the Senate. And so the voters in Connecticut will make that decision, not you or I. So I think, and on Palin, my point was, that was not my opinion. My point was, we know that that's how voters perceived this election. Even those in the beginning who said, hey, we kind of like her story, we're interested in her, and there was a lot of people like that, they still were concerned that McCain had spent the previous 4 months, if they knew anything about John McCain's campaign, it was that he had spent the previous 4 months attacking Barack Obama for lack of experience, particularly foreign policy experience. And now he picked Sarah Palin. So again, not to me, to voters, they said that seems awfully political than what he must not have meant what he was saying. And that caused some erosion on some very important credibility measures. And then secondly, the more people learned about the process, that it appeared to them to be a little bit haphazard, done at the last minute, not kind of the rigorousness they would want attached to that kind of selection. That bothered them too, again. So that's not my opinion. That's the opinion of the voters out there who are processing this. Obviously, there's plenty of people who thought otherwise, but I think for swing voters, for women independent voters in particular, at the very beginning, even when Palin hadn't had any of her performance issues, well before that, you know, there were some concerns about those two measures. And I think generally on vice presidential picks, they rarely have determined presidential races. They just don't. It tends to be, I think, an over-covered part of politics. People just want to make sure, okay, you pick someone who's qualified. I think about a third of these people have become president after all. So people attach some seriousness to the pick. They're not going to base their vote based on that person, but they, okay, did you pick someone who's qualified, and did you go about it the right way? And again, that's not my opinion. That's our sense of the voters.
All right, before we thank our guest, David Plouffe, and our student journalists, let me just remind you that this series on political communication and the Epicenter of Politics speaker series continues every Wednesday night here on campus. Speakers still to come on political humor, on the Obama administration's approach to the Muslim world, and an assessment of public opinion during Obama's first year. Plus, on December 2nd, and that's a new date for those of you that are relying on previous information, former Republican Party Chair Ed Gillespie will be right here to help assess the future of the grand old party.
By the way, if you can come, you should. He's a very bright guy, and I think a very able person. He'll be a great asset to this program. So come and listen to him. He's a very smart guy.
So now let's thank our student journalists, Antonia Borelli and Ashley Byro, and our special guest, David Plouffe. Thank you very much for coming. Good night, everybody. Thank you.